For those of you that are either joining us for the first time or just getting restarted, or you need to just need a fresh copy of your database, from this point forward, you can actually just use the complete intro to SQL container that I set up for you. So let me just show you how to get that up and running really quick. Okay, so I have multiple of these running. I'm just gonna kill my PG one because I'm not gonna work on that one anymore. And I'm gonna say docker kill SQL as well. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say docker run. I renamed mine SQL just so I could differentiate between PG and SQL. You can call it whatever you want, doesn't really matter. Basically everything's the same. I'm gonna put this on 5432, but this is relatively the exact same command that you ran, except I changed the name to SQL here, and then instead of Postgres:14, I put bt-hold/complete intro to SQL. I already had you pull this one at the beginning of the course. So if you run that, that'll come preceded with all of the various different database things that you're going to need. You might see a warning about something like this isn't built for your computer. It should still work, so don't worry too much about it. You might lose some performance, but it's not a big deal. If your database is fine and working as from yesterday, you don't have to change that. That's totally fine. You will at some point, but you don't have to do it now. And so now if I say docker exec, make sure you're running against SQL, not PG, if you called it the same thing as me. If you called it PG, then you'll put PG here. This is just whatever you called the container. You could also literally copy and paste this whole hash here. That would be fine. And then you run that, and if you hit \L, you should see OMDB. That's a new one for you. You should see recipe guru, which is what you should, it's a copy of what you did yesterday. Just to prove my point here, you can see these are relatively the same tables. If you're running that and you're not seeing the recipe guru one, let me know, because I'm curious, because someone else saw that. But you might have to pull again. Just, which when I say pull, you'll kill your container, and then you'll say docker pull bt-hold complete intro SQL. You might even put latest there or something like that, though that's implied. You can see here for me it's just saying yours is up to date, so don't worry about it. All right, so I'm going to reconnect to mine, docker exec, that. I'm going to connect to my recipe guru, that. And then I'm going to clear my screen. I just hit Control L, by the way, if anyone's curious how I'm clearing my screen. I don't know if you care, but that is what I'm doing. Okay, we are going to start in the JSON-B chapter, or section, which is section 5 here. Right here. So, JSON-B. So I imagine most of you have probably heard of MongoDB, right? Or have used some sort of document store before. When MongoDB came on the scene, I don't remember exactly when it came out, but I remember when I had first heard of it, which would have been probably 2011 is when my company that I was working at said, this is a really interesting piece of technology. We want to put this into our stack. The first tech conference I ever went to was Mongo World in San Francisco. It's the first time I went to San Francisco. I was so excited. It was a really, really cool piece of technology because we could do databases, but they didn't have to have these hard schemas. You could put objects in there. You could have heterogeneous objects, this object has this shape to it, this object has this shape to it. They exist in collections. It was all really, really exciting. It still is. It's a really cool database that has really good uses for it. I still use it today. Stripe uses it a bunch in a bunch of different places. And if you're interested in a course on it, I left a little link here to Scott Moss's course on Front of Masters if you want to learn more about specifically the Mongo database. I also talk about it in my complete intro to databases. So it's a document-oriented database. We talked about that. Postgres is a relational database, but Mongo excels at data that is unstructured, which is to say you have data that's incoming that you don't have a future knowledge of this is exactly how this is going to look, right? that's where Mongo is really, really useful. So a great example of this is our photos table. We have a separate table for our photos because we don't know how many photos we're going to get, right? If we knew it exactly up front, we were going to have exactly 5 photos for every recipe, we wouldn't need a separate table. We would have 5 columns in addition on our recipe schema. But we don't know that, right? It can be 0, it can be 1, it can be 100. This is where Mongo would be really useful, because in Mongo you can just put an array, right? You can just say this is going to have an array of photos, and I don't know how many photos it's going to have, or maybe even if it has photos. So you can do this with Postgres now. I think it was Postgres 9. Don't quote me on that, it doesn't matter, so no one check. But at some point, Postgres added the ability to be able to attach a column to your database that is JSON. And then you can query not only the column, but you can query into the JSON. This is called the JSON data type. So it's actually a data type where it will verify that it's valid JSON, and then you can actually make queries into the column and into the JSON structure underneath. And they came out with this JSON data type, and people loved it. But they found out that they could actually make it even better. What they were doing before is they were just, as far as I know, storing it in plain text. And then later they went back and said, we can actually make this better. We can actually optimize how much space this takes and how fast it is to query. So they came out with a second data type called JSON B. The B literally stands for better. I'm not joking, it actually stands for better. So it is JSON better. In other words, you should basically never use the plain JSON data type for Postgres. You should always use the better one. I thought that was hilarious that they had literally put in the name that this is the better one. You might ask, is there any reason to ever use the plain JSON data type? Because it does more processing on those JSON B ones, the better ones, if you don't care about querying it very frequently, like if you don't actually want to see that data very often, it actually technically is faster to store the JSON ones because they do no processing on it. The other thing is that if you care about the white space in your JSON, which one, why? I have questions for you. But if you do, JSONB drops all of the insignificant white space. JSON will preserve the white space for you. I think there's probably some other minor nuances, but those are the 2 big ones I could research when I was looking it up. In other words, I'm just going to tell you, just don't use JSON. Even those are such minor things that you can probably still just get away with using JSONB. The one thing that they called out on their particular website is that if you're doing it for logging purposes, right, and you're just if you're writing a lot and not reading a lot from it, which is what people do with logs, JSON could be potentially useful in that situation. But everything I'm going to show you after this point, you can actually literally do on JSON or JSONB. All the querying works exactly the same on both of the columns. It's just how they're stored that's different. There's a whole blog post here from Citus Data, which is one of the best Postgres companies. It's actually a company that Microsoft bought because they were better at Postgres than Microsoft was. So I got to work with those people. They were nice people to work with. I'm going to throw out here that there's another thing called HStore. And this is closer to Redis. It's like a key value store for Postgres. Every time that I go to use HStore, JSONB is a better fit for my thought modeling. So I ended up always using JSONB. So I decided to not talk about it because I think JSONB is just overall a more useful thing. But if you're finding yourself I need some sort of key value store like Redis, but I don't want to use Redis or Memcache or something like that, HStore would be for that. Yeah, you get basically all the functionality of HStore from JSONB for the most part. Okay. That's kind of an overview of what we're about to talk about. I'm going to show you, we're going to add a little bit more to our Recipe Guru database. We're going to add tagging, but just so you know, I showed you how to do the one-to-many relationship from recipe to many photos, right? These days I would use JSONB to do the recipe photos. I would not use a separate table. I would actually use JSONB because it's way easier to deal with. You don't have to do any joins. You can just query the column, right? So if you have those one-to-many relationships, high probability that you probably want to use JSONB instead of trying to use another table. The many-to-many relationships, you're still going to have to do like the intermediary table, so like the ingredients to recipes connection. That's still going to be another table. I guess you could model it in JSONB, but I probably wouldn't. I'd probably still do the relationship through the tables.